All right, and we are live. Hey, this is Joe Begley here. I hate long introductions, so we are just going to get right into it. Today, we are solving a pretty simple code wars problem called sum mixed array. This is given an array of integers as strings and numbers. Return the sum of the array values as if they were all numbers. So we're going to solve this problem today using JavaScript. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare a function. Now, it takes an array as an argument. What we're going to do is we need to iterate through this array. Now, there's a number of different ways you can do this using JavaScript. You can use a for loop, but you can also use the array.map function. So the way this works is you add map to an array, you put a function in, and then the argument that you pass is going to be the element of the array. So it's going to list out every element in the array. Console.log element. Now to illustrate this, I will execute this code in the console. And we're going to run through this and see what happens. Great, so what we're going to do here is we're going to execute this code in the console and see what happens. The console Node has a built-in JavaScript emulator that you can download for the console. If you don't know how to use the console, or if you're uncomfortable using the console, I think that's a little bit of a different conversation. You can find a whole bunch of information online on this on YouTube, W3 Schools, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And it's pretty straightforward once you get used to it. So if you're uncomfortable with it, don't worry about it. Just focus on the JavaScript. I'm sure you can figure this out eventually, but I would focus on the JS first. So what we're going to do here is we're going to execute the code in the console. Great, and you'll see that the map function is iterating through the array and showing the elements one by one. But that's not what we want to do here. We want to sum the array. So I'm going to declare a variable. Let is basically the same as var, except you're saying that the variable has the ability to change. Let sum equal to 0. So we're going to start it off at 0, and then we're going to add up every additional element. So we're going to say sum plus equals element, and then at the end, a function just returns something at the end, so we're going to return the sum. Great, I'll execute this right now. 1, 2, 3, not what we were looking for. Now what's the problem here? The problem is actually pretty straightforward. What happens is in JavaScript, when you sum integers, they add to each other, but when you sum strings and integers, it concatenates them, and concatenate is just a really fancy word for join. So rather than going 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, it's going 1 plus 2 is a string of 1, 2, 1, 2 plus 3 is 1, 2, 3. So how we can fix this is we can parse the integer out of the element and add it to the sum. And this solves the issue here. We get 6. We get what's expected. So that's great. But there's actually different ways that we can solve this. Every once in a while when I come across a problem, I try to sum it up and see if I can do it in one line of code. And I'm going to attempt to do that here. And I think it's possible. Now, there's alternate syntax that you can use for JavaScript. You can declare a variable. Const just means it's a constant. That means what you're going to declare is that variable is not going to change. So I'm going to declare sum mixed one line. Now the way you do this is you say constant, you set the name of the function, you set the arguments here, which is an array, and then you put a forwards arrow. And whatever you put past the forwards arrow, so everything here is what you're going to return. You'll see what I mean in a second. So what we want to do is we want to return the sum. But it's really hard to declare variables over here, so I'm going to declare it as an argument. So I'm going to say sum is equal to 0. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate through the array. and then every single time I go through it, I'm going to say element, and I'm going to use the same syntax here. I'm going to say element to parse int element. What I want to do here is I want to use the reduce function. Okay, so because I'm having a tough time properly explaining something that's a little bit more in depth like this, I have got it pulled up over here in the documentation. So the reducer takes two arguments, an accumulator and a current value, and then it spits out what to do with them. So what we're doing in this case is we're taking the accumulator, which is the sum, which we've already declared to be equal to 0, and we're taking the current value, which is the elements that we're iterating through. What we do is we wrap these up like an argument, and we convert them into sum plus element, and it'll return these values. So let's try to execute it in the console. We will do sum mixed array, and then we will do sum mixed one line, and we'll see what we get. 6. Okay, so just to reiterate what happens here, because this is a little bit confusing. So up here on the multi-line function, we declare a variable and we set it equal to 0. We iterate through all of the elements, and every single time we hit a new element, we convert it into an integer and we add it to the sum. Then we return that sum. Down here, we're doing the same thing, we're just doing it a little bit differently. We declare a function, we declare it as a constant, and sum mixed one line. It takes two arguments. It takes the array and it takes the sum, which we are automatically declaring to be 0. That's why we don't need to throw it in as an argument here. Then what we do is we map out all the elements much like we did up here, except rather than pass in this function as the argument, we pass in this function, which takes every element and converts it into an integer. At that point, we reduce it. We take the accumulator, which is the sum, and every time we hit a new element, we add that to the sum. And then it automatically returns it because that's the syntax here. So this has been my first JavaScript tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm hoping this is going to be the first of many. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, if you have any tips or questions, please write them in the YouTube comments or the LinkedIn comments. I'm going to try to make this a very regular thing where I solve problems. And I think it's a great way to start. I think it's a great way to learn languages. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully we expand out past JavaScript. If not, it's all good. All right.